Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
What do you want to do with your life?
I want to talk.
Welcome to this week's I Want to Talk. So you may hear various sounds of, I want to say day-to-day living, because I live in on the Caribbean and it's very peaceful. But for some reason, whenever I try to do a show, the peace is broken. So if you listen carefully, you can hear a landscaper in the background with a blower, with a leaf blower. In the next room, there's still some ongoing construction going on, tile work or something like that. And it seems like whenever they are not around, I can't record. And the minute I sit down to record, they magically appear and start doing things. So hopefully it doesn't become so bad that I can't even talk to you guys. So anyway, this week, well, before I get into this week's conversation, and as I said, I view it as a conversation because it is based on social media interactions. So I'm seeing people's positions and hearing your voices along with the other voices in my head. I hear your voices with your thoughts, your questions, your positions. So to me, it is a conversation, even though I am monologuing. But before I get to this week's conversation, which popped up online, I first just want to remind you to please consider subscribing to the show. I believe that there is when you access this show through iTunes or wherever you're accessing, there is a way to subscribe. And if there isn't, here we go. It's going to start hammering, because I think they hear me recording and they're going, oh, this is a good time to start hammering. Maybe I'll go postal on them. Remember that term, go postal? That's kind of disappeared in recent years. Go postal. That used to be a thing. Now it pales in comparison to like what's going on just with these shootings and stuff like that. You don't even hear go postal. Anyway, so that said, it's Gas Digital Media. I think it's $7, $9 a month. If you're listening to my show regularly, consider subscribing, because for the show to continue on, I've got to get subscribers and I've got to get advertisers on board. And through subscriptions, that's the only way it will continue. So let's go there. So please, Gas Digital Media, you can figure out how to do it. I mean, I know you're a smart bunch of people, especially if you're listening to me. Not that I'm smart or that smart. I am smart, but I don't think I'm that smart. But still, if you're listening to this type of show, this type of conversation, this type of exposition, you're certainly smart enough to figure out how to subscribe to the show. Okay, and it would be really, really helpful if you did. So now the workers are deciding they're going to have conversations. I was told this was their lunch break. I sat down because it was their lunch break, and this is a new breed of construction worker here in Belize who works through the lunch. Very impressed, but why only when I want to record a podcast? All right. So what caught my eye this week, it started with a post that was a repost of a Nikki Sixx quote from an interview, and it was posted in Blabbermouth. I kind of reference Blabbermouth a lot, actually. I think more and more. I guess that reflects they are very hooked into the zeitgeist of what their audience wants to talk about and what they're interested in. And certainly it's reacting with my audience. And I'm going to assume that what they wrote about Nikki, what they said about what they quote about Nikki, because my quotes in Blabbermouth are always accurate. They never misquote me. They never misconstrue me. They never edit or misrepresent what I said. So I'm going to assume that what Nikki said was accurate. And it wasn't in Blabbermouth. What was it in? He was being interviewed. Oh, it was Kerrang! It was a Kerrang! Interview that Nikki did recently. And he was, and the thing they grabbed onto was it was something about grunge music. And the question was, did he think that grunge music killed hair metal? And Nikki said grunge music did not kill hair metal. Hair metal killed itself. And somebody reposted, and I just simply wrote, he's right, or I agree. Well, my agreeing with Nikki got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of likes, of retweets. So this to me says a topic of interest, a topic of conversation to talk about on I Want to Talk. So Nikki's position, and I went back and I read the article from Blabbermouth, again, assuming that they're not misrepresenting him because it's not their style. And that is, he simply said that the music itself became, and I'm paraphrasing, overblown, and just sort of hair metal just became sort of it was one of that movie Multiplicity, where the copy, Michael Keaton was in it, and he made a copy of himself, and then so he could do more work, and he kept making more copies of himself so that he could do more and more things and cover more bases because he was so busy. But then ultimately, what he realized is that each copy was a little fainter than the previous copy, a little less of the true him. And by the time he got to, I don't know if he had 7 copies, 8 copies, whatever he had, the last copy was moronic. Well, in my view, the hair metal thing became a multiplicity issue. Okay. And, just taking off from and expanding on Nikki's hair metal did it to itself. When hair metal first came out, it wasn't hair metal. It was just metal. And if you go to those earliest bands, there was Twisted Sister, and we predate everybody, having formed in 76. Motley Crue came out in, their first big album was 83. But I think their first album was 82. I could be wrong with the dates, but what I'm saying, early 80s. Rat, the early bands that came out, it wasn't called hair metal. Just like it wasn't called metal when Sabbath and Zeppelin came out. It was hard rock. We were just metal bands. We were a variant on metal bands. We were different from other metal bands, but it was still heavy. It was a heavy metal, and I would say it was filtered through the glitter rock of the early 70s. And I know from talking to Nikki, and it was interesting, I never met Nikki during the day, but we wound up being at a gathering or a party somewhere many years later, and I'd say it had to be in the 2000s. And we were talking, and it turns out that Nikki, I always thought that, Twisted formed in 73. I joined in 76, but we were begat, there's that word, I love that word, by the glitter rock movement of the early 70s. And we were carrying, and the band started as a New York Dolls, David Bowie, Mott the Hoople, T-Rex, that kind of band. I joined loving that music, knowing I was joining a band that was from that birth, from that background, and I embraced it. But I also, as I've said before, loved heavy metal and brought my metal with me and sort of married them together. Now, I knew that Crew formed, roughly in 1980 or something like that. Again, please, don't jump all over me. It's close enough for rock and roll, as they say. But the fact of the matter is, they formed many years after Twisted Sister formed. And I thought that they were sort of, I don't want to say they were copying Twisted Sister, but there was something brewing. And Twisted and Quiet Riot, who had been around for a long time. Iron Maiden also, metal, but they were over in England, had been around since 76 as well. So I thought they were jumping on that, like a growing bandwagon. I don't want to say jumping on because it implies that they didn't genuinely like the music or whatever. And I'm not saying that at all. Just saying that there was something happening and they were hooking into it. When Twisted Sister first went out to LA for the first time, it was on the Blackfoot Krampus Twisted Sister tour. We played the Hollywood Palladium. Vince Neil, this was 83. Vince Neil came down to the show, came backstage, and he knew all about Twisted Sister. And he was really excited to see Twisted Sister. And as a matter of fact, said, "Hey man, can I bring my girlfriend back to meet you?" Like it was like an exciting thing to meet Twisted Sister. So I kind of figured that they were, because we've been around for a long time, and the reaction to us in LA, I kind of figured that it was, again, Quiet Riot was carrying the torch for that early glitter, mixing it with heavy metal, and Twisted Sister was. So there were these bands, and I thought a lot of these other bands was sort of like growing out of that. Wrong. When I met Nicky and we started talking, it became very clear that even though he's a few years younger than me, I think Nicky is maybe 3 or 4 years younger than me. He was very much into the same scene as we were. And he was in bands that were carrying the torch for that glitter rock of the early 70s, Alice Cooper, David Bowie, these bands like that, New York Dolls. But none of the bands that he was in were going the distance, meaning being stable. So he was in a band called London, and you saw them talked about briefly in The Dirt. Well, London was this band that a lot of people, Blackie Lawless was in London. I believe Izzy Stradlin was in London from Guns N' Roses. So a lot of people went in and out of the band London, and Nicky was in London for a while, and they were very much into this glam kind of thing. So there were people carrying the torch for it. They just and Blackie himself, had a short stint in the New York Dolls. He was clearly a fan of that as well. So, like Twisted Sister on the East Coast, there were these people out there on the West Coast who were enamored and just carrying the torch for this music, but they didn't have the vehicle, the stable vehicle to sort of like connect the dots. Where Twisted Sister, you can clearly see, formed in 73, tail end of the glitter era. Well, actually, it was sort of the heyday of the glitter era, and then continues on. There's a paper trail, as I would say, with emails. There's a paper trail for Twisted Sister's legacy and where we came from. It's not as clear with Nikki Sixx and Blackie Lawless and people like that, because they were in a variety of different bands. But if once I talked to Nicky and he explained, you could see, oh, he's been a fan of this stuff too. And you look in The Dirt and that scene where his mother walks in the room, he's playing guitar to a T-Rex song. All right, so there's that, that's a glitter band, a glam band. He's a young man. He's younger than I was at that point, probably 12, 13. I was, 17, 18. So there's the age difference, but still, it's the music that gave him the bug. So hair metal, as it starts out, is not known as hair metal. It's just metal. And Twisted Sister, when we went over to England, excuse me while I trying to get into this, like the plastic thing is just, if you really start to look into it, see any documentaries, there was a thing on, I think it was 60 Minutes, or maybe it's not 60 Minutes, but one of those shows, insane, the plastic. So trying to get into, carrying the reused fillable bottle kind of thing. When Twisted first went over to England, there was no Motley Crue, there was no Rat, there was no Poison, definitely no Poison. There was none of those bands were around. Makeup bands were loathed. the residual, I've talked about it before, Girl, Phil Lewis and Phil Collins' first signed band, they were literally bottled off the stage at the Reading Festival. So, because they wore makeup. So, I mean, nobody was doing that when we got there in 82, 81, 82, I forget, but around that time. And we were just an odd metal band. And we toured with Maiden, and we toured with Saxon, and we toured with, with Motorhead, Metallica. It wasn't like there was no distinction at that point. And when Motley Crue came out, and then Rat, this is all around 83, 84, there was no distinction. It was just metal. It was a variant. It was a different kind of metal, and there was a glam feature to it, but we were still a metal band. It wasn't until Multiplicity set in that it started to become hair metal. And the Multiplicity was executed by the record companies. And there's a point to this. As you know by now that I'm taking you someplace with this. The record companies it blows my mind that they ever existed and that they've ever had any success. And it's just such a shame that the artists, for the most part, lack the business acumen to do the business aspect of things for themselves. They really conflict each other, by the way. The business and the creative, they're really just, they're counterintuitive, they're counterproductive. They don't work well together. And it's very tough to do both, to wear both hats. And if you do, you really got to separate them. But then there's a matter of finding the time to do it. So record companies were born to handle the business. But the people in the record companies are fucking morons. And as far as they're talentless garbage. Well, there's a few different types in there. Okay, you've got talentless garbage, and there are people who exploit the artist like it's a product and see that they can make money off of this product and take advantage of the artist. Then there's some people in there who have a true love for the music, for the art. It popping in my head is Ahmet Ertegun and Netsuhi Ertegun, the two brothers who founded Atlantic Records. They were two children of Turkish diplomats who fell in love with race music, R&B. And they were smart kids living in the United States, and they used to go to these soul clubs, these black clubs, and to see these black artists. And they'd be the only white kids in the place. But they just discovered the music, loved the music, and they wanted to expose the music, give the music exposure. So their motivations were as pure initially. They were true music fans. And I got to know Netsuhi and Ahmet before they died a little bit. And I have to give them credit for that. They wound up to build an empire and became very, very, very wealthy people, but their motivations were pure. The same can't be said for a lot of the people who work for them and who inherited their empire and I think that a lot of these record labels, most of these record labels, like a lot of movie studios, United Artists was started by Charlie Chaplin and somebody else, to create a film studio for the artist with an appreciation of the arts and the artists themselves. And eventually it was taken over by corporate and a bunch of lawyers running it. And so you've got a lot of lawyers in these record companies with no musical talent at all. Yet they have no problem chiming in on what a mix, what their thoughts about a song. Then you get other people who are failed artists. Not all. There are failed artists or people who failed at making it in the business. So they went into the record company side of it, and there's this inherent jealousy that just permeates everything they do. Like there's a disdain from a lot of them, like, why you and not me? And I could have done this so much better than you. They never say that out loud, but it's there. You can feel it when you hear about their, history, and what they almost did. Almost being the operative word. So you deal with, literally in record companies, non-talented garbage, corporate people. And as the companies grew, they're businesses. So they brought in business people to run businesses, not artists, not creative people to run the business. Because the fact of the matter is, the creative people, for the most part, couldn't run the business. So they needed business people to step in. So you got number crunchers and lawyers in high positions taking over, running the companies, making decisions. And one of the things that the way they do, I'm going to get to the multiplicity thing in a second, is very, very big in the record industry, is throw a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks. Atlantic Records, created by two genuine lovers of music, went on to be run by people who were numbers crunchers, lawyers, and failed creatives who had such a resentment because, artists are organic. It's not the new Coke. It's not a product that you can package and it's has a shelf life or whatever, and it's like, here, we create it, here's the widget, it's done, put it in the storage house, and now we have to figure out how to market it. No, you got to deal with flesh and blood human beings, passionate people, art people, people who are erratic at times and fallible. And the record company executives hate us for it. They hate us for it because, unlike their buddies who are working over at Nabisco, their product isn't predictable. It isn't definable. It isn't truly replicatable. So they're dependent upon us. So there's this built-in resentment that sits there. It's horrible. So Atlantic Records would sign a whole bunch of stuff, and they just put it out there without any support. This was their SOP, standard operating procedure. They'd put it out there, and they'd see what didn't die. Throw it out there, baby bands, say a dozen of them, and see what doesn't die. It didn't mean that the product was bad. Things need to be supported. But their view was, if it couldn't survive on its own, let's throw a half dozen kids into the water. Babies, the ones that swim, we keep. The ones that drown, we don't keep. Could have been, baby wasn't physically capable of swimming, but had a great brain. It doesn't matter. Through this theory, if it's not capable of swimming, it has no value. Well, this Spartan mentality permeated Atlantic Records, and many a great band, and many a shit band, by the way, have fallen by the wayside. So we were just thrown out there, not in England. In England, we were supported very much. The record was worked. Phil Carson, the guy who signed us, he signed ABBA, AC/DC, Genesis, yes. Twisted Sister, there's a Bad Company, not Bad Company. Trying to think. He's responsible for about 375 million records sold. Phil Carson. No longer with Atlantic Records. He's my manager. The only guy in the record industry who I've remained friends with throughout. Signed my band to a shitty deal, by the way. But a straight up, straightforward, hey, this is all I can get for the band. Do you want the deal or not? We had no choices. We signed a shitty deal, knowing the deal we were signing, but with a genuine, honest, straightforward guy. It was not like some surprise. And it was everything was, all the cards were on the table. And this guy, Phil Carson, he put his job on the line to sign Twisted Sister and wound up breaking the band in the UK. Subsequently, we broke around the rest of the world. The Atlantic Records US had rejected the band 5 times. The head of the record company was this wannabe rock star lawyer, just talentless asshole. And when we were signed in the UK, he actually was angry about it. He literally told Phil Carson it was on his head. And we succeeded, and this guy wound up taking as much credit as possible for our success. He also wound up pulling the plug on the band the minute things got weak. This guy hated us. I'm not going to get into his name right now. I've mentioned him in my books and stuff like that, and it's not a matter if I start talking about him, I'll get sidetracked. The point being, our record was released out there in the United States, a record that was a hit in the UK, no tour support, no support. They made a poster. No video support, no nothing, no promotion. We went out on the road on our own dime. 5 guys in an ugly duckly rent-a-car, 3 guys in a short stay motel room, and we started selling records. We didn't drown, we didn't die. And then once the record got into the hundreds of thousands of copies with no support from the record company in the United States, then they said, okay, we're going to work this record. This was the philosophy of Atlantic Records, and I'm afraid it was my guess is the philosophy of many other labels as well, because you had, by the 80s, you already had these mega corporations and a bunch of lawyers and accountants running a creative business, resentful lawyers and accountants. So multiplicity sets in. The record companies, in their infinite wisdom, have a belief that if 1 is good, 100 is better. Meaning, if a Twisted Sister has success, if a Motley Crue has success, then we should be signing, the record labels, everything with a pair of spandex, lipstick, and a flying V, and some poofed out hair. That'll be better. Well, true to multiplicity, there was a signing frenzy, and exactly that took hold, especially in LA, where, there's always been different hotbeds of, not always, but there's been different hotbeds of music scenes, Liverpool, England in the 60s. You get San Francisco at one point, and I'm talking about the hippie days, with Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, all those bands coming out of there. You got Seattle later on for the grunge scene. LA became the hair metal capital of the world. And many bands were traveling there to make it. So because the record companies, again, in their infinite wisdom, were going, oh, Motley Crue and Rat came from here, so this must be, and Van Halen before them, Van Halen and Quiet Riot, so this must be where they all are. They're not looking anywhere else. So bands like Poison and bands like Warrant and bands like I'm just trying to think of a Black and Blue. I'm just thinking bands that off the top of my head I know who literally got in the van and drove out to LA to be discovered, because no one was going to look in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. That's where Poison are from. No one's going to look there. So the bands had to go to where the stupid record company was looking. You literally had to go to move your body under the A&R guys' noses because they wouldn't look anywhere else. You had to go to them. Twisted Sister didn't, because we had gone to England and got signed over there. So there's a legacy for that too. Joan Jett did it. Jimi Hendrix did it. Stray Cats did it. So, there's a history with American bands who couldn't get a deal in America going over to England to get discovered and then coming back to the States and having great success. So the record companies now are on the prowl for these Motley Crue type bands, these Twisted Sister type bands. They're prowling the Sunset Strip exclusively, but this is where they're looking. But they are looking, and the idea is we got to sign as many of these things as we possibly can. We got to sign as many of these bands, which we call hair bands, as we possibly can. And where Twisted Sister, Motley Crue, I mentioned Rat because they were early out there, Quiet Riot, Van Halen, and I'm sure I'm missing some other bands that were early on, where these bands were inspiration, came about from love and passion and belief. You know, you see it in the Dirt. Nikki has this idea for a band, and you got to get, Kiss, a big inspiration for a lot of these bands. Not so much for Twisted. I'm a Kiss fan, but it was very much Alice Cooper and the New York Dolls for us, and but certainly I'm a fan of Kiss. I had the first 7 albums. I love what they did. But they were a big inspiration. But these bands forming, and when we were working in the late 70s, and you got to remember, and I'll give this to Nikki as well. My nose is itching me for some reason. I don't know if it's being on camera. I don't know. I'll give this to Nikki as well. When Nikki was in London and these other bands carrying the torch for this glitter rock that we were as well, this is the disco era, the height of the disco era. Rock bands could not get arrested during that time. So you got to remember where our passion has us fighting the tide. There are many people, many musicians who went with changed, and they still do whatever's popular at the time. And many musicians went and played in disco bands because that's how you made money. Working, to be a working musician. But there are people like Twisted, Quiet Riot, Nikki, particularly Nikki, I think, especially when you see the Dirt. Mick Mars, he was certainly carrying the torch as well in that band. So that we're championing and saying, fuck disco. Disco sucks. And very much trying to resuscitate this awesome music that we grew up on, the glitter rock of the early 70s. So, all right, so the multiplicity. So the record companies start now, bands see something is happening. Bands are having success. Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot, Motley Crue. I'm mentioning the same bands, but record companies are on the prowl. Bands are forming to take advantage of this now. Okay, they want to take advantage of this, and they are copying. The bands are copying bands like Twisted and Motley and Rat and Quiet Riot and Van Halen. Other bands are copying multiplicity. They're imitating the bands that are already out there. Okay? Now, the record company starts signing these bands. Now, the record company, all they want to do is figure out a formula. They want to figure out a way so they can cookie cutter this thing. They hate that it's organic. They hate that it's inspired. They hate that it's driven by passion. That doesn't work. It's too inconsistent. They need to stamp this thing and produce this thing and put it on a conveyor belt. And how do they do that? Well, as the scene continues, certain producers start to rise out of the pack as producers who know how to produce these bands. Then there's certain songwriters who start writing and having success. The first one doing that was Bon Jovi, Desmond Childs. Desmond Child, who was from a band called Desmond Child and Rouge, an unsuccessful band. He was a songwriter. And I don't know where he had his first success. It may have been over in Kiss, by the way. But it was with Bon Jovi co-writing the songs You Give Love a Bad Name. And Bon Jovi were very much tapping into, they're one of those bands that was tapping into what was going on, the Zeitgeist. They were tapping into, and now John particularly, and Richie, and all those guys, they used to come see Twisted Sister in the clubs. I didn't know them. Apparently, I harassed the shit out of them because they were acting cool. And they used to come to the Jersey bars to see Twisted Sister. They were studying the way we perform, studying the way I handle an audience. I'll go right there. Okay, this is something from here. Something for you, blabbermouth. John Bon Jovi learned how crowd control, how to work an audience by watching Dee Snider in the bars of New Jersey. That's where he learned his stuff. Except what he had going is he was handsome. So he brought handsomeness to it. Okay? But they were working with always working with outside songwriters. The album before Slippery When Wet, that record, I don't know what it's called, but they had another songwriter they were working with on those songs. They're always writing with outside songwriters, pros. Not Twisted Sister, not Motley Crue, not Rat. It was, not Quiet Riot. Well, Quiet Riot, not Quiet Riot, but they did a cover song. But that's not unusual. Doing what do you call it? Come On, Feel the Noise by Slade. That's no different than Van Halen doing You Really Got Me. There's nothing wrong with that. That's doing cover songs is as old as music is. Nazareth did Love Hurts, Everly Brothers song, Smoking in the Boys Room crew did it. That's just, that's okay. But people started working with outside writers. Desmond Childs, they had 2 huge hits, and Desmond Childs became the go-to guy and wound up writing with Alice Cooper, writing with Joan Jett, writing with Cheap Trick, writing with Aerosmith, writing with Kiss. Again, I might have wrote with Kiss beforehand. So now the record companies have producers that know how to produce hit records. They've got songwriters who know how to write hit records, songs. Then they get the costume maker. There was a woman who wound up marrying Mike Tramp, Fleur, her name was. She became the costume designer. Suzette did the Twisted Sister costumes. She worked with other people, but she worked pretty exclusively with us. We had kids, never really had the desire to go and just become like that person. Fleur, on the other hand, that was kind of her ambition, and she worked with many, many people, many, many bands, but she became the costume designer. Then there was the video directors. And Marty Callner, who did the Twisted Sister videos, I Wanna Rock, We're Not Gonna Take It, The Price, became one of the go-to guys. And he wound up doing Whitesnake and Aerosmith and the Scorpions and Bon Jovi and on and on and on. So now the record companies got a pattern. Now they've got a formula. Multiplicity. They go and find a band that's got the basic pieces. They got hair, they got a flying V, they got spandex or leather pants or whatever it is. Okay, great. And now let's plug them in, give them the producer, the songwriters, the video director, the costume designer, the management team. Certain management teams. You saw Doc McGee. That was McGee Thaler. Or they made a joke out of the fact they cut Doug Thaler out of the movie. Doug Thaler was essential in McGee Thaler, and it's a shame that Doug got cut out because Doug was a bass player. He was in a band called Elf. Elf was Ronnie James Dio's band, original band before Rainbow. Doug Thaler was the bass player in Elf. Pretty cool. Okay, so this guy was a genuine music fan. So a great guy, but he got cut out of the movie. But there was also Q Prime. I forgot what they called back then, but that's Metallica, Def Leppard, AC/DC. I'm forgetting the guy's names. Peter Mensch. And he has a partner. Sorry, dude. There's 2 of them. And these guys are brilliant managers. Peter and I have had our issues, but brilliant managers who have managed successfully bands for decades and decades. And they've got have an incredible history of success. But still, you have the managers. You got the managers, the producers, the songwriters, the costume maker, the video director, and then now the record companies are cooking with gas. They're putting them out, multiplicity, copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and so it goes. And it's becoming more and more watered down, more and more predictable. I mean, when you got the same songwriter writing hit songs for all these artists, you're going to start having similarities in the sound of the songs. The same producers. It's just everything became repetitious. Okay? Now, heavy metal, which thrives in the shadows, is now on the top of the charts. I used to think that that's where it belonged. I used to try to get it there because I love metal. I figured the world needed to hear it, but ultimately, making it to the top of the charts nearly killed it. Had to scurry back into the shadows and lick its wounds until it came back out and grew and thrived in the shadows again. But going back to these mega albums by Whitesnake and Def Leppard, Def Leppard and Bon Jovi, as Sebastian Bach called it, happy metal. When Bon Jovi came out, we found out that heavy metal people had teeth. They were smiling and not snarling. It was happy metal. And that made it more watered down. Metal wasn't supposed to be big smiles and big teeth. Metal's supposed to be, that's metal. But no, now it's smiling. Now it's friendly. Now it's kinder. It's gentler. More predictable. And then, the last nail in the coffin. And this is all playing to Nikki Sixx saying heavy metal did it to itself. It did, but with a lot of help. I mean, hair metal did it to itself. And unplugged. Unplugged. I firmly believe that was the end of heavy metal and hair metal. Because if you got no amp, what's metallic about it? And I love Tesla. I think they're a great band. I think they're great guys. They're friends. But I've told them straight to their face, it's your fault. 5-man acoustical jam. Was it 5 or 4? That record. Signs. Acoustic guitars. A metal band. And let's say, we were in metal, we were blues based, we were in a hair band, we were wearing flannel. Okay, whatever. But you were hooked into that scene. And in fairness, Tesla didn't buy into the traditional hair metal thing. They fluffed it up a bit, but they didn't buy into the hair metal thing. But that said, they were part of that wave. So now 5-man acoustical jam comes out. MTV is all over that shit. I think they did a concert. All of a sudden, bands start unplugging. Now, I don't remember, I should, but I was so disgusted, I wasn't watching MTV by that point, that which came first? I know that Tesla came first, but if it was unplugged and then followed by all the acoustic songs, or the acoustic songs followed by unplugged. But suddenly there was a TV show on MTV called Unplugged, where these electrified bands, these metallic bands, were sitting with acoustic guitars and playing their songs, going legit. There was this unspoken suggestion that unless you could unplug your amps, you weren't truly a musician. To which I say, bullshit. Bullshit. And I used to say, Twisted Sister will unplug when Tracy Chapman and Paul Simon ride the lightning. And by that I mean strap on a Les Paul, strap on a Stratocaster, straight plug that motherfucker into a Marshall Stack on 10 and play your songs electrified. They wouldn't know what to do because that's a talent. That is something learned. It is a specific style. It is electric. It's a specific style, a specific way of playing. It's something that you train yourself to do. It's not an accident. It's not a moron. Like, if you can't play music, you plug into an amplifier. No. But it was unspoken, but it was inferred by all these people unplugging. And then, I think it was after that, then came the unplugged bands. Then came More Than Words. Great song. Extreme. An amazing band. An amazing metallic metal band. Electric band. Live band. Rocking band. Amazing. But the world discovered them sitting on stools, crooning like they were in the Beatles. Mr. Big. Amazing, talented players. Metal players. Heavy players. And what was their song called? First in line, to be with you. To be with you. Unplugged. Acoustic. A big hit. Saigon Kick. From what I've heard, a great metal band. And what's their hit? I can't even remember. It's actually a cover. But it was another acoustic song. So what's a heavy metal band without amplifiers? They had been, their geldings, they had their balls removed. You can't be heavy. You can't be metal if you can't play with power. And now, why do we even need you, metal bands? If there's no amplifiers and you're not metallic and you're not doing what metal is, pounding drums, screaming guitars, thundering bass, screeching vocals, well then, why is the genre even needed? Multiplicity. It just got watered down and watered down and watered down. Became a parody of itself. Became just a shallow shell of its original self in the early 80s. And now people started getting tired of it. Overexposed, overblown, overplayed, underappreciated. And now the audience starts souring. Everybody, it's like anything. The new thing everybody's excited about, then familiarity breeds contempt. And people got tired of it. And up and coming musicians, some of them started getting tired of it. Now, you look at the first grunge bands, it wasn't called grunge, just like it wasn't called hair metal. They were just metal bands. Alice in Chains was just a metal band. Okay? Soundgarden, just a metal band. Pearl Jam, Mother Love Bone was a hair metal band. Their singer died of an overdose, and they got Eddie Vedder. So you've got this hair metal band, and they start modifying the look. And you see bands, people at the end of the hair metal era, you got your Teslas tiring of the look, Skid Row, the hair's still big, but they got the cutoff thing going on. And then you get, I'm trying to think, but people are starting to tie Guns N' Roses, hair for days, but now they're starting to get back to the leather and denim and, and kilts, whatever that is. And, so that's wearing thin. People are losing, the luster of that is going. And now everybody's unplugging. I mean, Guns N' Roses unplugged for sure. Okay. And now these bands start coming out. They're metal bands, but they're modified metal bands. And they're rejecting a lot of the excess of the hair metal time. The 80s bands. Their hair is just flat now. They're wearing flannel shirts. They come from Seattle. People thought that was a style, a statement. No. You ever been to Seattle? It's survival. You can't survive in Seattle without a fucking flannel shirt. I've never been colder than Seattle. And it's not one of the coldest places in the world. It's damp as fuck. And it just seeps into your bones till your teeth are rattling. Flannel shirts are a way of survival in Seattle. Nothing to do with fashion. Became fashion because the bands became popular and they were wearing flannel shirts because they were cold. But Alice in Chains toured with Ozzy, right? These bands were great metal bands, variants on heavy metal. It became, and then what happened? These bands started to blow up. Nirvana, Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, in his diaries, he talked about Smells Like Teen Spirit and says everybody's talking about, the rejection of old rock, corporate rock. In his own words, he said, let's turn this off. Smells Like Teen Spirit, the riff is more than a feeling by Boston. Sing them to yourself. That's Kurt Cobain said it, not me. I told Tom Schultz that. He was like, oh, fuck. So grunge, the big change, was begat by corporate rock. And Kurt says in his diaries, the video, he says, it was a glorified Twisted Sister video. His words. The school. Familiar setting. Yeah. So these bands weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. They were rejecting a lot of the 80s ethics and creating their own sound. So that music came in because, as Nikki said, the hair metal bands did themselves in. The record companies did the music in. They overindulged, they oversimplified, overformulated, made copies of copies of copies of copies. And when it got to the end, it was just a pale memory of what it started out as. They killed the goose that laid the golden egg. And these bands came out of Seattle who were just doing a different form of metal, suddenly had a name, and guess who invaded Seattle? The record companies. Signing everything with a flannel shirt. And what was the guitar of choice back then? I don't know. But it was always some kind of weird instrument. Ukulele? No, it wasn't. And they started signing them. And the same thing happened. Local musicians seeing the scene changing. Stone Temple Pilots. Here's a good one for you. Went from being a hair band to being a grunge band. And listen to their first things. You can literally hear pieces of Nirvana songs in their first album. I mean, it was so imitative. They wound up finding their own sound and wrote some great stuff, STP. But when they first came out, it was like, I want to get close to you. I mean, so imitative of the other bands out of Seattle. It was insane. And then the copies started, and they started formulating the music. And the record companies figured out, how do we make this? How do we formulate this? How do we make this into an assembly line of grunge bands? And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. And I don't see it ever ending. Because anytime something new, something creative, something inventive, something successful happens, there will be corporate assholes. There will be businessmen and businesswomen who want to figure out how to capitalize on it, how to monetize it, how to formulate it, how to turn it into a product and bury the world in it. The end. Okay, so again, please consider subscribing to my show. I Want to Talk, Gas Digital Media. And I mentioned to you that I do these cameo things now. I'm having fun with them. And I think people, judging by the ratings I'm getting, the reactions I'm getting, I'm doing things from the sublime to the ridiculous. If you can imagine what you might want Dee Snider to do a video asking, announcing, wishing, encouraging. I did one where a band asked me to just give them a pep talk. and they bought a Cameo where I just talked to them for a couple minutes, and they said it like changed their lives. It was like it was a Dee talk. It wasn't a TED talk. It was a Dee talk. It's just, I'm waiting though to for the I quit, fuck you to the boss. I'm waiting for the I hate your guts, I want a divorce. I'm waiting for those. I haven't got any of those yet, and I know they exist. I know people have asked. People do cameos to tell the boss, fuck you. John's quitting. So, but you download the Cameo app. It's really freaking simple. And check it out. You can even just go to the website Cameo and check the website and just see samples of what people do. It's pretty cool. Okay. So, that's it. I'll see you next week for more I Want to Talk. I don't know what I'll be talking about because I'm monitoring social media, the Zeitgeist, what you guys, people who are following me, are interested in talking about. So until next time, see ya.